So today I'm going to be brewing a batch of beer. This is for a brew club that I'm a member of here. They're doing an experiment on some malts. So I'm going to brew a batch today, a 5-gallon batch. Just got a few things started. Got the water in my pot. Here's my setup here. So I will go ahead and heat this up to, I think the temperature I'm shooting for the water is about 160, 165. So that when I add it to the malt, it will drop down to, haven't looked at the instructions, but I think it's about 158. All right, got my grains in there. Water's almost up to temp. I looked at the instructions. I gotta get up to 175, so that when I put it in the grains, it'll drop down, like I said, to about 158, 160, and let that sit for about an hour, and then I'll be ready to boil after that. Just wanted to show you, so this is where I'm at right now. Like I said, I've got to get to 174. You know, so not quite there. Got my grains there. So I will, once I reach my temperature, I will pump the water from this tank through the pump through here, this fitting, into there, a little over 3 gallons. To about 158. That will be good for my starch conversion. Okay. All right, so I've got the temperature up to 174 where I need it. It actually dropped a little bit. Oh, there it is, 174.2. I need 174.3. Got my pump hooked up. Got the drain from my water opened up into my pump. Just priming the pump. Just opening this valve a little bit to get some water into the pump, so it doesn't, what's called cavitation, doesn't cavitate, which is where basically you're just pumping air. You don't want that. You want this pump to be completely full of water. So it's primed. This is open. This is open. Water is starting to seep in here. You come around and show the water just kind of seeping in just from the force of gravity. So I will turn the pump on just a little bit, just to get some more water in there until all the grains are covered. And this will be about 3 gallons, a little over 3 gallons of water that I'm putting in here. Should be about right. So I'll close my valves so that the water doesn't drain back. And yeah, you can see it's a little colder than what I was wanting. I was wanting about 158. I'm about 152. Will still work, not ideal. I'll just cover it up to hold the heat in there and set a timer for about an hour. Got about 8 minutes remaining on my timer to hit the hour of soak of the mash. From there, I will add about another 4 gallons of water to sparge. Sparge is basically just adding water on top of the existing mash that you've got. just to pull more sugars out. From there, I will circulate the water, or the wort as it's called, a few times for a few minutes. I mean, not a few times, but a few minutes, just to maximize my efficiency. And then from there, I will drain it into my boil kettle, and I will boil it for an hour, add the hops as needed. It's just one addition of hops, and it'll boil for the entire 60 minutes. All right, my hour's up, so I'm just going to run the pump again, pull out about 4 gallons out of this tank, run it through the pumps and back into the mash tun to sparge. To show you exactly what I've got going on here. So what I'm going to do is pump this water up through. I've got a little colander here, and through this hose. It's the water. You don't want to run at full speed, so I'm going to kind of clamp off the flow to it a little bit. So that it's just kind of trickling through, just so it doesn't disturb the bed of grain I have here. Because the grain itself, even though there is a filter at the bottom, the grain itself will act as a filter as it compacts. Okay, so this looks good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer my hoses from my hot liquor tank. Basically, it's just where I boil, or not quite boil, but heat the water up to my temperature that I need for whatever. But I'm going to remove the hose from that tank, put it on the bottom of my mash tun where I have all my grains and wort in, and I'm going to cycle it through a few times until it starts running clear. So basically all of the finer particles will be pulled from the bottom through the stainless steel screen, transferred back to the top. It'll continue that cycle until it makes a nice filter bed. Okay, so what I'm actually doing now is a batch sparge. So I'm pulling, 7.5 gallons through, draining it at the bottom, running it back to the top, and I'll do this for 10-15 minutes or so. Looks pretty clear. I don't see a lot of sediment in here. Looks pretty light. This is actually a extremely light blonde beer. So I'll run this through for a while just to make sure. at all of the fine particles. I really don't want that in my boil kettle if I can help it at all. So again, I'll just run this through for a while. Okay, change of plans. I had topped it off with some water, but as I was going to clean out the mash tun, I noticed there was still some liquid in there. So I just set it back up, just draining just by gravity, just draining the water and everything out as much as possible out of the mash tun into the boil kettle. I would rather boil it a little longer, try to boil down some of the liquid, just to make sure that I have as much fermentable sugars in there as I can, and as much flavor from the malt as I can as well. So I'm just gonna let this drain. It's almost done, but I think that put the boil volume up around closer to 8 gallons now. So I just had to boil it a little longer to get, which, you know, it will happen. It'll just take a little longer, but it's not a big deal. All right, so it's been, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 minutes. Finally reached a boil. Sorry, I had to move into the garage because I feel like it was about to start pouring outside. But once it started boiling, it's time to start adding the hops. These are mosaic hops. So I'll add these, and these will stay in there for the entire hour that it's cooking. Luckily enough, I'm using a large pot, because a smaller pot, whenever you add these types of additions, it will have a tendency to boil over. Because I'm only roughly halfway up in this pot, this is about a 15-gallon pot. There's only 8 gallons or so of water in there of wort or beer. So it's not a big deal. It, you know, raises the level a little bit when you do any kind of addition like this, but it's not going to boil over. So this will go for an hour, so I need to set my timer, and I'll come back to you once an hour has passed. One more thing I wanted to add is when you are brewing, and especially on the boil, you don't want to leave the lid on your pot. I do have a lid that fits this pot, but you do not want to boil it. You do not want to cover it while you're boiling it. The reason for this is you want to boil off, obviously, excess water, but any of the volatiles that are in there as well. You know, the purpose is, you know, it's just to get rid of any kind of contaminants that might be in the beer. So you don't want to leave the lid on there for those two reasons. But just wanted to add that little tidbit of information that I've learned. I'm sure a lot of you, this is useless knowledge to you. I don't really care about brewing. Maybe you do. If you've tuned into my channel, like I said, it's going to be a kind of a mixed bag of stuff. You know, I'm into so many different hobbies that you'll see a lot of different stuff here. But like I said, I will try to divide it all up into different playlists depending on what the content is about. But I do appreciate you tuning in. Thanks. All right, so it's been an hour. Reached our volume that I wanted to stop at. Worked out perfect. Like I said, I thought I was going to have to boil it a little longer to cook it down, but ended up actually at what probably should have started at, but it will work out fine, because I think that'll work out good for me. I'll put it in a larger carboy. It's not much larger than it should have been, but it'll work out. So I'm gonna go ahead and start cooling it now. You know, get all that hooked up, hook the garden hose up to it, run it through, and yeah, it'll work out. So Actually, I think I will move this outside. It didn't end up raining, so I'm gonna move it outside. It's cooler out there. There's a nice breeze blowing. Plus, with the garden hose hooked up, it'll be a lot nicer than trying to run another hose for the exit of the hot water. Because, like I said, you hook the garden hose to one side, and the other end, yeah, you can hook another garden hose to it if you would like. But it's going to take both my hoses just to reach out to the driveway, so I'm just going to use the one, and it'll just run out into the driveway. All right, so I got moved it back outside. Just got the hose here. I'm gonna hook this up and hook the drain hoses from the boil kettle to the pump, from the pump through the cooler. One more thing I'd like to add, in addition to running through the cooler, it'll actually be running through a like a cyclone as well. I've got two outlets, or two inlet outlets on my brew kettle. The top one that you see here is actually hooked to a hose on the inside that runs maybe a third of the way around the perimeter of the wall of the brew kettle. And what that will do is, in effect, kind of cyclone the beer, and it'll collect all the sediment kind of right in the middle, so you don't transfer it out. Actually, I might do that for maybe 5 or 10 minutes before I actually run it through the cooler, so I don't pull any of that stuff through the cooler and clog it up, because it's kind of a pain. It's the walls in it are pretty thin, the passageways rather. I just don't want to clog it up, because it's, like I said, it's a pain to clean out. I mean, I back flush it anyway, but it's just, and once it gets in there, it's just a pain. It may or may not come out all the time, and just to protect it a little bit, make it last a little longer, I'm just gonna do the cyclone a little bit before I run it through the cooler. just want to show you what I was talking about. Hopefully you'll be able to see this. You see all the kind of sediments floating around in there? Yeah, I don't want that to collect into the cooler. But you can see here, right along the wall, is that hose that just kind of comes out. Maybe it's not a third. It's just a short little hose, and all it does is just creates a vortex, cyclone, whatever in here, and it'll collect everything right in the middle. So that way, when I pull it out, run it through the chiller, it won't all collect inside the chiller. Like I said, I'm only going to do this for a couple of minutes. I do want to drop the temperature of this fairly quickly. It is sitting at 188 right now, and I want to get it down, you know, to 70-ish as fast as possible. So let's get that going. Let me show you what it's doing here. You can see it's got a little swirl going on, and all the stuff is being stirred up. It'll, like I said, it'll all collect in the middle. There's a little bit of coagulant in there as well, and that's what it does. It helps draw all that stuff and coagulate and draw it all up together like a ball, and it'll help collect it all right in the middle. So it'll work good. So I just wanted to show you the two things I added here. Whirl flock. This is the ingredient that kind of coagulates everything down to the middle together, draws everything, all the particles and solids and everything, as well as this Y yeast beer nutrient. Added both of them about 10-15 minutes before the end of the boil, and it'll help give the yeast a little bit something extra ferment. All right, I got this going. It's been, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or so. Looks like most of the stuff is falling out down to the bottom, which is exactly right in the middle where I need it. So I'm gonna turn this pump off and run it through the chiller and cool this stuff down. Just doing this, it got down to, you can see, 171. So it dropped about 10 degrees. Nothing fantastic, but that'll work for what I need. And I'll start the chilling process, and you'll see how fast this temperature drops. Now's also a good time to tell you everything that I have used has been sanitized. I've got a little spray bottle with some Star San. Takes just a very little amount of that to water, and it works great. So everything that I've got my carboys, all my hoses, my vessels, brew kettles, all that stuff has all been sanitized, because that's extremely important with beer, especially, or any fermented product, wine. You don't want any extra bacteria in there, just the bacteria from the yeast or anything else that you want to ferment. So you don't want to add anything unless that's your desired result. A lot of people will brew and they won't use the yeast per se. They'll use natural yeast that's floating around in the environment, in the air, to ferment their stuff. So the water that's coming out of my chiller, I use that. I collect a little bit of it, use that for just rinsing out things, cleaning up, while this is cooling down, because it's going to take a little bit, 20-30 minutes maybe, to drop down to the temperature that I need. So I was just rinsing out my my carboy to ferment in, and then like I said, I'll spray it out with sanitizer. All right, so I'm at 80 degrees. It's been sitting there for about 5 minutes now. I don't think it's gonna drop any lower. I don't think the water is gonna get any colder. So I'm just gonna go ahead, transfer it to my carboy, pitch the yeast, and I'm just gonna put it in the basement, let it sit for a week, and then transfer it to the secondary after it's done fermenting. So I got my yeast, it's Safe Ale, US-05. I always sanitize the packet and my scissors that I'm using, just to make sure that nothing gets transferred. It doesn't hurt to be overly cautious on this, and you can never be too clean for brewing. So I just wanted to show you this, what I was talking about. It doesn't get it exactly perfect, but you can see that it's fairly collected right in the middle. All the stuff, this lighting out here is horrible, and I don't want to agitate it too much. But you can see it's all kind of coagulated in there. All the proteins and everything, it all collects. And this is also important. The height that I'm doing this, I did this on purpose to oxygenate the beer, the wort. You want to add oxygen in there. It helps the yeast as well, just to get a good fermentation done. So. I'll just let this fill up, and then I'll put the airlock on it. I use a little different airlock. Some people use what's called an S-type airlock. I don't. I did when I first started brewing, but now I've had some pretty active fermentations. So, yeah, I mean, with a lot of sugars, and I've used those S-type airlocks, and it's exploded on me. So I use just a cap on the neck with a hose coming out into, you can use a mason jar or a bucket, whatever, just, you know, full of water, so that the gas can escape, but nothing can enter back in here. So you want to keep it sanitary as possible. Okay, so there we go. That is a 6-gallon carboy, and I got approximately 5 gallons in there, which is fine. You can see there's some proteins in there. They'll all fall out to the bottom, but I'll agitate this to kind of swirl it around, get the yeast all dissolved in there. But you can see down here all the remaining proteins that stayed pretty much in the middle, and not, you know, like I said, you don't get them all with the Whirlflock, but it definitely helps, as well as the cyclone vortex, or whatever you want to call it. But it definitely helps. All right, so I just wanted to show you this better light in here, in the garage. All the sediment that had settled down to the bottom. As this sits for a couple more days, it's going to get more and more sediment down there. It'll get stirred back up once the yeast starts doing its thing. But I will leave this. I think I'm going to put it in the basement, where it's cooler and darker, and it'll do its thing down there. But this is also, in case some of you were wondering what I was talking about, where you've got a cap and then a hose coming out, and this other end, I'll put this into a bucket or a jar half full with water, so that it can, you know, the gas can pass through it, but nothing can enter back into the beer while it's doing its thing and fermenting. But again, just wanted to show you. Thank you guys for tuning in, and hopefully this wasn't too boring. I've been out here about 6 hours, so hopefully I can condense this down to only a few minutes, so I don't lose any of you guys' interest. But thanks for tuning in. Comment below with anything that you'd like to see or not like to see on this channel. Like, subscribe, and I appreciate it. Thanks.